Good evening and welcome everyone in ISSN YouTube channel. Today we are going to talk about the mineral which is calcium and why calcium is important by the athlete perspective and for our daily life. Okay, आपके daily life में or let's say in your daily diet, okay, why calcium is required and what role does calcium plays for normal functioning in the body. Okay, so today what we are going to learn is we are going to first see the introduction. Okay, then we are going to see like what are the uses of the calcium in the body, or you can say it as a biochemical functions, or you can also say it as a biochemical functions, how calcium is regulated, which hormones are responsible for the regulation of calcium. Okay, which are the factors which increases the absorption of the calcium, and which are the factors which decreases or inhibits, okay, the absorption of the calcium. Okay, so now let us start with the calcium. So now calcium is a mineral which is abundant in the body. Okay, abundant. Abundant means it is much more present in the higher amounts. Okay, काफी ज्यादा बॉडी के अंदर कैल्शियम प्रेजेंट होता है. Now how much calcium is actually present in the body, and that is around 1 to 1.5 kilograms. This much amount of calcium is present in the body. Okay, now where this much amount of calcium is present, where it is stored? So okay, so it is stored 99%, okay, in our bones, okay, and teeth. It is stored in our bones and teeth, 99%. Now 1% of calcium which is stored in extracellular fluid. Okay, which is stored in the extracellular fluid. Now what do you mean by extracellular fluid? Extracellular fluid means the fluid which is present outside the cell. Okay, you can also call it as a blood plasma. So this 1% is being regulated by the body. Okay, so हम लोग आएंगे, we will come to that topic like how much actually amount of extracellular fluid is there inside the body. Okay, so 99% of the calcium which is stored in the bones and the teeth. Okay, very important part. And how much calcium is actually present? So it is present around 1 to 1.5 kilograms. Okay, so now what are the sources from where you can get calcium? So it is milk and milk products. Okay, next meat, fish, eggs. Okay, next is vegetables. Okay, and let's say at last we can count as a cereals and pulses. Not a rich source, but still you can count it for the calcium source. Okay, so these are the sources from where you can get the calcium. And at last, supplements. Okay, so there are two supplements. One is called as calcium citrate malate, and one is called as a calcium carbonate. Okay, there will be a different lecture on calcium citrate and calcium carbonate. So we are not going to discuss that total over here. Okay, how it is working and all. So now these are the sources for the calcium. Okay, and this is where the calcium is stored. So how much amount of calcium is regulated by the body, or what is the normal level of calcium in the blood? So it is around, so normal level, 9 to 11 mg per deciliter. The normal level of calcium, okay, which is found inside the blood, it is around 9 to 11 milligram per deciliter. Now what is the recommended dietary allowance? Okay, RDA, which is called as recommended dietary allowance. So in adults, you require around 800 mg of calcium on everyday basis. 800 to 1000, 800 mg of calcium on everyday basis. In children's, you require around 1500 mg of calcium, and women who are pregnant, lactating, or let's say menopause, they require around 1500 mg of calcium on everyday basis. So this is the recommended dietary allowance what your body requires on everyday basis. Okay, so we have seen that. Just for a summary, so there is around 1 to 1.5 kg of calcium which is inside the body. 99% of calcium is stored inside bone and teeth. 1% of calcium, 1% is stored in the extracellular fluid, and this is the 1%. Okay, now in this also the calcium, there are different forms of calcium. Okay, one is diffused, okay, one is binded with the proteins, one is freely available. So now the sources, I told you, milk and milk products, meat, fish, eggs, vegetables, cereals and pulses, and the supplemental form. And this is the recommended dietary allowances. So this is the basic overview of the calcium. Okay, now we are going to see which are the factors which are going to influence, or let's say which are going to increase the absorption of the calcium. Okay, so now starting with the, so we are going to see the factors which are going to increase the absorption of the calcium. Which are the factors that are responsible for the absorption of the calcium? And starting with first, the most important factor is vitamin D. Okay, now understand, vitamin D, either cholecalciferol or calcitriol. Okay, cholecalciferol or calcitriol. So there is a big process in the synthesis of vitamin D, but generally vitamin D, okay, is formed because of exposure to the sunlight. Now let's say in today's world, okay, the exposure to the sunlight, actually people are getting very less exposure to the sunlight. Okay, because of the, your, what you can say, because of the changing world. Okay, this is the reason many people are facing the issues of bone mineral density loss, or let's say the calcium is not getting absorbed very properly. So vitamin D is the most important factor for the absorption of the calcium from the intestines. Vitamin D is highly responsible for the absorption of the calcium from the intestine. Okay, you can get vitamin D, okay, from the food sources also, okay, especially from the fish. So suppose somebody is having fish, or let's say, see, there are two things basically: vitamin D either from the diet or vitamin D from the exposure of the sun. So suppose somebody is not getting exposure of the sun and somebody is not having good sources of vitamin D also, okay, so they are going to face lack of absorption of the calcium, and they are easily going to face any kind of bone related disorder, okay, which happens due to lack of calcium. So now, why vitamin D is required? For the absorption of the calcium from the intestine. So vitamin D, if the level of vitamin D rises, or vitamin D is produced in a very right manner or in a normal manner, so the calcium absorption is going to get higher. Okay, so I will write here cholecalciferol or calcitriol. Okay, what is the second factor, okay, which is responsible for the absorption of the calcium or increase in the absorption of the calcium? And that is called as parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone, which is also called as PTH. Now parathyroid hormone indirectly helps basically in increasing the absorption of the calcium, because parathyroid hormone stimulates the production of the vitamin D. So if the parathyroid hormone stimulates the production of vitamin D, by default it is going to help in the absorption of the calcium. Third, which is the third factor? High protein diets. Somebody who is having high protein diets, these kind of diets are going to help you in the absorption of the calcium. So these are the three main factors which will help you in absorption of the calcium. Now, from the perspective of exercise, weight training will also help you. So, in order to improve the bone density, or in order to improve the bone mineral density, weight training is an important factor to be considered for absorption of the calcium. Okay, so these are the four main factors which will improve the absorption of the calcium. Now, continuing with that, so these are the factors which are responsible for absorption. Now, which are the factor which inhibits, okay, which are going to inhibit the absorption? So, let's say if the vitamin D is not produced in a normal manner, or there is lack of vitamin D, so obviously the calcium which is going to get absorbed from the intestines are not going to it's not going to get absorbed, because vitamin D is responsible for the calcium which is getting absorbed from the intestine. So the calcium which has to be absorbed from the intestine will not happen properly, and what is going to happen? You are not going to get a proper amount of calcium. Second, somebody who is having high fiber diet, somebody who is having excess amount of higher amount of fiber, okay, in their diet, this is going to inhibit the calcium absorption from the intestine. Okay. Third, high fat diet. So somebody who is having high fat diet, high fiber diet, and somebody is having low amount of vitamin D, okay, these are the factors which are responsible for limiting or inhibiting the absorption of the calcium. So one thing you have to be very clear, the vitamin D has to be in a good range. Parathyroid hormone should be in a good range. You should consume high protein diets, okay, and obviously you have to include weight training. So these are the two things, basically two categories: inhibition of the absorption of calcium, and basically which are the factor which is going to be responsible for increase in the level of the calcium. So now from the athlete point of view, from the athletic point of view, or from you can say from the sports perspective, athletes who are involved in weight training, okay, somebody who is involved in weight training, somebody who is lifting loads, whether it would be female or whether it would be male, okay, minimum amount of calcium which is required on everyday basis, it is around 2000 to 2500 mgs. This much amount of calcium is essential for them. So this much amount of calcium you can either take it from the sources, from the food sources, or you can take it from the supplemental form. Okay, absolutely, there is no problem. Somebody who is not having such kind of food sources, they can go for a supplement form. Okay, so now what are the basic functions what calcium plays inside your body? Now we are going to discuss the function of the calcium. What are the function of the calcium? So these are the basic functions. We are not going to dive into depth, but I am just going to explain you in a very shorter way and in a very easier way. The first function is muscular contraction. So you might have been, you might remember the skeletal muscle anatomy and the muscular contraction and the sliding filament theory. So in that we have seen there is a troponin in which the calcium goes and binds, or you can say a calcium binding site on the actin. So when the calcium gets attached to the actin, the myosin gets attached to the actin and the sarcomere shortens, right? So for the muscular contraction, you require calcium ions, right? So now neuromuscular transmission, then the formation of the bones and the release of the hormones. So there are certain hormones which requires calcium ions for their release. Okay, so these are the most important function which help us to keep the body in the normal functioning. Okay, now from the sports point of perspective. So the athlete who is actually engaged in the weight training, why it is important to consume calcium, or why it is important to consume calcium rich foods, male or female. Okay, so the reason is, when you do weight training, so let's say this is your bone, okay, and this is the shaft of the bone, right? This is the one end of the bone, this is the another end of the bone, and in middle there is a shaft. So suppose when you are lifting the weight, okay, you are actually creating a compressive forces on the bone, right? So bone is getting compressed. So because of that, there are micro tears in the bone. Okay, so what we call as a micro trauma in the muscle. So there are micro fractures in the bone. Now this has to get repaired. Okay, these has to get repaired. So for this repairing purpose, calcium is an essential mineral. That's why the recommended dietary allowance of the calcium is around 800 mg. But when you talk about athlete, the intake of the calcium is much more as compared to the normal person. So athlete, male or female, who is engaged into weight training should have more amount of calcium for this purpose, because you are basically doing weight training, and you are actually creating micro fractures in the bone, so which has to get repaired. Suppose now let's say if you are not providing calcium to the body from the food or from the supplement, you are not providing it, so what is going to happen? Your body is going to start utilizing your own calcium, and because of that there will be bone mineral density loss. There is loss of, which is called as BMD, bone mineral density, and slowly and steadily the bones will get weaker and weaker, and you will not, the performance of the sport is going to drop. So this is the importance of calcium, and this was just an overview of the calcium. Basically we explain each and everything, each and every biochemical reaction in our lectures, in our course, that is Diploma in Nutrition for Sports, Exercise and Wellness. So I hope this lecture is clear, or the overview of the calcium is clear. If you have any question, please drop in the comment box. I'll try to answer it. Thank you.